Matt Scott, welcome to Suit Up the Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Terrence. It's a pleasure to be here. Can't wait to dive in.
I am so thrilled to see books behind you. Like, that's always a good sign for me, prepare as we're getting through the interview here, is to go, oh, this person reads. Like, I always assume when you write books that you read, but like when I actually see titles behind you, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a good sign.
Yeah, I have like there are worse things to have in the world, but I certainly cannot be trusted when I go into a used bookstore. I will walk in, thinking, let's take a look. I might get one, and I'll come out with six.
Mm-hmm.
So, I got these are all my bios or biographies and stuff, and then I got the Vince Flynn stuff over here
Uh-huh.
to the left. My wife's little section of the bookshelf is slowly shrinking.
That's the reality of how it goes. I admire the fact that you have your books divided up that way because technically I used to work at the library as a kid. And so I know the
Okay.
Dewey Decimal System. I actually have the books like lined up behind me in a loose Dewey Decimal like organizational structure, just because I am that nerd.
That's okay, man. I mean, the Dewey Decimal System, it's a lost art, man. I remember the days going to the library and still having to look through the cards. I'm 44. I guess I'm that old now,
You
but
look fantastic for
it,
your age.
oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was, but you miss those days.
Well, I think that gives something to like talking tactile things. Like that's what I love about books. And I'm holding up
Mhm.
your book here for the listeners who don't know that I'm holding up a book. Uh, there's something special about holding something, and that's why
Right.
I get that we live in an increasingly digital age, that it's easier to
Hmm.
just put something on Kindle, and that's great. But I think that there's just something so special about having the physical book. That's why, like a lot of the books behind me that you can see, they're from series. They're like the hard case crime books where they do these lush covers, and
Right.
like they anytime, and this is something I enjoy about your books, is that you do have a theme to how they are made and designed.
Yeah, I actually the covers on the books was I actually expected a lot of pushback from my publisher on that, and I received none. So I kind of came up with uh, the covers of each book, pretty much on my own. They edited a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
I had a vision of what I wanted it to look like, and thankfully, I keep getting positive feedback on the cover. So, it
Mm-hmm.
makes me feel good that, not only can I write a little bit, but I have a little bit of a, true artistic uh, side of me as well. So that's pretty nice to know.
Well, and that's something that really is underrated. I think I was thinking about this yesterday because I'm one of those people who has like zero artistic eye. I know when something looks good or bad, but like I don't design things. I've always outsourced that. But
Yeah.
when you can do both, when you can make really good words and have a good visual eye for designing something, it's like it's
Hmm.
a powerhouse 1-2 punch.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, when it comes to books, I mean, your cover is your number one marketing tool. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that it's good. I mean, would it have been nice to, get some more, feedback or assistance on it? Sure. I mean, I didn't, but I'm totally green to the publishing industry. So I was
Mm-hmm.
going with, what I wanted to see. And
Mm-hmm.
I just have to hope to God that, the readers keep liking it.
Well, have you heard of the Maya rule? Most advanced yet acceptable.
No, I haven't heard of that.
Okay, so it was I can't remember what book I read, and I think it might have been The Hitmakers. Basically, the guy went through this book on why is it certain creative things grab a foothold and talked about Maya,
Okay.
which is this idea that something has to be familiar, otherwise we reject it because we're afraid that because it's different. But it also
Right.
needs to be just enough novelty. What I think that your covers, just in particular, and to an extent with your stories too,
Mm,
they have a feel where I look at it and go, oh, I know that that's a political espionage thriller. But it
that's
also
good.
looks just enough different where I'm curious because it does not look exactly like Brad Thor or Vince Flynn.
Okay. I like that. I tell you what, you're giving me all tingles, making me feel really good about myself. Thank you very much.
Hey, that's the job of having you on the show, right?
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
So walk me through where did the Lion's Den series start? So you've got 3 books in the series so far, and I am reading the Ayatollah Takedown. This is the
Mhm.
3rd book. It came out this last year. Uh,
Right.
When did this start? Tell me, what was the inception? We were talking Christopher Nolan beforehand, so let's talk about the inception.
Yeah, the I guess the genesis for me was sorry, my puppy is trying to climb in the chair with me.
No
Um,
worries.
it, it's it started for me with I was never a big reader. I'll try to make this as brief as I can, but I was never a big reader. I hated reading in high school and college. They just made
Hmm.
stuff that I just did not like.
Forced you
And
to read
then the Da
books you don't
Vinci,
enjoy. Shocking.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Invisible Man, The Good Earth, Watership Down. Oh my God, Watership Down. I wanted to go rabbit hunting after that book. I hated that book so much. I really did. I literally took, I would never say this about, I would never recommend this to anybody, but I hated Watership Down so much that I
Hmm.
actually hit it with a baseball bat after I was
Yes.
done. I hated it that much. So anyway, then the Da Vinci Code comes along and it's absolutely a phenomenon, right?
Hmm.
So one of the things that I really liked about Dan Brown's books is not only is he giving you a learning experience, but he's taking you on a tour of all these different countries. And it was in Rome for Angels and Demons. For Da Vinci Code, it was mostly Paris, but he took you to London as well. And I started thinking about that. I was like, well, where if I wrote a book, where would I want to take somebody? And it would have to be somewhere that not a lot of people know. So then I started reading the novels of Vince Flynn and Brad Thor. And as you read, you tend to absorb things, and ideas just kind of start generating because
Hmm.
you're not only reading the story, you're basically taking a writing course
Yeah.
from the author because you're seeing how they develop the characters, how they mold the plots, and things like that. So, and then I read Beirut Rules, which was a nonfiction novel about a CIA agent that got captured, I believe yeah, in Beirut, and they never got him back. So I started kind of forming these ideas, and I came up with the idea of Iran because
Hmm.
Iran has always fascinated me simply because it's really an unresolved war, ever
Hmm.
since the hostage crisis, and these guys are always an enemy. It's the government, and but I think there's a side of Iran that people don't know. Like when the Shah was there, it wasn't life wasn't great for the Iranian people because I think the Shah was much more of a dictator than people really think of him as. But it was still it was a good mix of Western and Middle Eastern culture, I think. So there are still good people in Iran. So I wanted to tell their story too.
Hmm.
And then, but self doubt always kind of creeps in. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I could do it. But then I went to go see David Baldacci. And I was 39 at the time, and I drove through a snowstorm to go see him in Williamsburg. It's a true story. And I got up to the table, and it's like, look, I'm getting ready to be 40 next year. Is 40 too old to write your first novel? And I kid you not, he stopped mid signature, looks up at me, and says, hell no. The industry could use some good young writers. Now, I didn't know if I should feel better that this legendary man was telling me to go forth with my destiny, or the fact that he thought 40 was still young. But you know, I went home and I started outlining essentially immediately. I think it was in November. I started outlining and then I started writing on it in February of that year. The first draft was much different than the final version, but yeah, that's how it came to me. And the cool thing about it is I actually saw Baldacci here in Charlotte a couple of weeks ago. I think it was Memorial Day weekend, and I told him that story, and he actually gave me a hug. I couldn't believe it.
Oh,
So that was it was a pretty good moment for me, and I'm going to see him at he's the guest of honor at VoucherCon this year in San Diego, so I'm going to go see him one more time. But yeah, that was a good moment for me, and that was the start of it. I didn't know it was going to be a series when I
hmm.
started it because you put your first one out, you never know how it's going to go. But when it went to market, my publisher says, "Well, I like it, but I don't want one. I want a series." So I'm on the phone with
Best
my
response ever.
agent at yeah, yeah. I mean, so it's like, but I had a couple of ideas just kind of floating around, but it was nothing more than that. It was just ideas. So I'm on the
Uh-huh.
phone with my agent. I got to come up with two more ideas really fast. So I took, the ideas for the Iranian deception and was now the Ayatollah takedown, and I just ran with it. And I basically crossed my fingers, and they said, "We got a deal."
That's awesome. Uh,
Yeah.
couple of quick things. One, it's amazing how perspective changes. When I first watched Crystal Skull as a kid in 2008, I'm like, wow, Harrison
Mhm.
Ford is decrepit and old. Now I watch
Yeah.
it in uh, 2023. I'm like, wow, Harrison Ford is 60 at this moment, and he is just holding it together. He looks amazing.
Yeah.
Just it's
Yeah.
shocking how that your thought process changes as you get older. I don't
Absolutely.
need to
Yeah.
tell you this or anyone else that hears this that's older than me, but I still like to mention it. One thing I thought was really cool in that story about David Baldacci is that
Uh,
I read Matt Bird, great guy. We've had him on the show recently, and he wrote a book about storytelling. And he made the comment that essentially it's not just a matter of writing what you know, but writing the feelings that you know. With
Absolutely.
experience and getting older, you have more of that to be able to put on paper. So I think it's really
Absolutely.
awesome that you started writing your book at 39, 40, because I think that's either one extreme or the other. People tend to think you have to be really young to start or really old to start.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I never really thought about it like that because, I've often wondered, what was it that it took me so long? But I think, yeah, really think it was experience, because especially emotional experience, because
Mm-hmm.
for me, you know, I grew up in, the Virginia Beach area, so there's a lot of military people around there that, I was able to kind of ask questions, going on, but I never joined the military. I've never been in any intelligence agency. Everything that I've written about is either based on research or,
Mm-hmm.
or talking with people. And so my strength there, I can't speak to, a lot of the technical systems or
Mm-hmm.
things that, the intelligence industry uses, like, kind of like Tom Clancy did,
Mm-hmm.
simply because, I don't have that background, and I'm not, I'm
Can I
not
say I
friends with
found
a
that
lot of people.
refreshing?
Oh, really?
I did, because I feel like that's the hard thing for me with what I'd consider to be most modern thrillers, is that they lean so hard into that technical element, trying to make sure they have every like T crossed and I dotted on using the correct serial number of whatever tech thing it is. It just kind of takes me out of it. All I want as a reader is a good characters and a good story.
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk, because I mean, you're trying to be as accurate as possible, but being as accurate as possible means that if you're going to use one of those real systems, then you
Mm-hmm.
have to write the book as if someone who is using it is reading it, because you don't want to come back and have them criticize you. I mean, that's the worst thing that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what I try to do is, use my research, but have my stories have a very strong concentration on character, and, how they feel in that moment, and how this character would react in that type of situation. Everything else, you just kind of, you do your research, maybe you reach a little bit, but you can't reach too far, because audiences will let you get away with a little bit, but they're not going to let you
Mm-hmm.
get away with a lot. They're not going to let you get away with, a tornado in Los Angeles. I mean, that's just, that's not going to happen.
You can't push the line too far. I read
Right.
I'm a big James Bond fan, obviously, poster behind me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a book where they called The Man with the Golden Typewriter. And essentially they collected all of the letters that Ian Fleming wrote about James Bond, some of
Right.
them with fans. The amount of people would reach out to him and go, I'm sorry, but you used the wrong gun in this scenario, or the Orient Express actually has a different type of braking system. And just his responses being as gracious as they were, when really he's like, I don't care, were astonishing and fantastic. And it's always been an inspiration to me in the idea of, okay, what level of research do we do? And speaking of
Yeah.
that, I want to ask you, what did the research look like for developing the world? Like, the thing that struck me reading this book so far is that Iran feels almost like and this probably speaks mostly to how very non-experienced I am with anything in the Middle East. But the it feels almost like Flash Gordon. And I mean that not to be derogatory. I just mean that it is a different culture and structure for the political system.
Correct. Yeah.
And I just find that fascinating where it has that religious counterpoint in their government. And it was
Hmm.
very interesting to read about. So, what did the research look like to flesh out the world itself?
So one of the things that's it's actually beneficial is that, as stringent as the Iranian government is on internet access, they're actually pretty lenient on Instagram and YouTube.
Oh, cool.
So it's actually easy. So when I go on Instagram and YouTube, I'm always kind of looking for, these feeds from Iran of people, going to all these different sites and what these things look like. And, when I did one of the palaces, I think it was in book two, I was able to, just query it in YouTube, and everybody's got, a phone these
Mm-hmm.
days, or especially a dash cam. Dash cams are really good. So, I mean, they're taking you on the tour of the country for you, and
Mm-hmm.
you just have to, kind of follow along. There are a couple of really good documentaries on Amazon Prime that I watched, because it's illegal. It's illegal to be an American in Iran, but if you have an Australian go in there, it's they're going to be a little bit easier on you. So I was able to see how a lot of the people interact, and what you really have is you have this concrete level of government, and then underneath it, it's the people, who are, not the fanatics that the
Mm-hmm.
government is. Are there people that are fanatics? Of course, and unfortunately, that's the case. But
That's the
there's
case in
also people
every
that,
culture.
yeah. But I think in Iran, it's you have to be really careful. I mean, because the fanatics there want to go nuclear. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they really want to blow stuff up. Um, but there's the other people who are just trying to survive, and they're living. The black market runs the economy in Iran,
Mm-hmm.
whether they want to admit it or not. Because inflation there is like, it's like 40% or something like that. It's really insane.
Wow.
That's why the Iranian dollar is so undervalued. It's one of the least valuable currencies. I mean, when you go in there, they don't like you to use U.S. dollars, because then they start paying attention. Now, of course, the government has no problem using U.S. dollars. They hate Americans, but they love the dollars. So, when you go in there, the euro is very prominent. Um, so yeah, no, I read about the Iranian hostage crisis. I read about the Canadian ambassador that actually hid the embassy diplomats. They were portrayed in Argo. So, but I'm a very visual person, so the documentaries in YouTube really helped me.
Mm-hmm. Was there any location in particular when you were doing your research, you're like, this needs to be here. This is the one that was most interesting to me.
Oh yeah, Evan Prison. Evan Prison. I don't know if you've gotten to that part in book three
Mm-hmm.
yet, but um, yeah, I tried my best. I really wanted to put it in book one, but I couldn't make it work. And I knew that book three, I had to find a way to get it in there. Now, Evan Prison is not a luxurious spot. Let's put it that way. But there have been enough political prisoners. The good thing about Evan Prison, I say good, and when
Mm-hmm.
I mean that from a research standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
is that there have been enough political prisoners that have come out of there that have written about it, that it allows you to do a lot of research. And one of those persons that came out of there she was Muslim. She converted to Christianity, and they put her in jail. And now she lives in Atlanta. I think she's running for Congress or something like
Oh,
that. So,
wow.
uh, yeah. So so there's a lot of books written about Evan. So that made the research part a little bit easier. But I always, on the cover of the third book, you've got a Zadi Tower, and it was, it's, to me, and I don't know if this is how others view it, but to me, it's supposed to mean Freedom Tower, which is ironic in Iran, where freedom is, very restricted. But I think it's the gateway really to the Middle East, in the same way the Arc de Triomphe is in Paris. At least that's how I chose to look at it. So, Azadi Tower is a big icon in Iran, and I think that I couldn't get away with not finding a way to feature that one prominently. But I tried to take people on, other locations, some of the palaces. There's a cave in book three that I don't think a lot of people know about. So I don't want to give away too much, but I
Hmm.
tried to explore as much as I could within the confines of three novels.
Well, and that's what I think is really interesting in the books is that it's you're using the place as a character. And that is
Yeah,
one of the smartest ways of anchoring your book because
yeah,
I can't remember what book it was I was reading on writing that was essentially like you have to try the best books maximize every facet of their premise and set piece. If you're
right,
not taking advantage of the fact that this story is set in this place, why is it set in that place? That
exactly,
place should have something to do inherently with the story. And
absolutely.
you do a fantastic job of that in this book
Oh,
because
thank
it
you.
it is a part of it inherently. This story could not take place anywhere other than Iran, and
Yeah,
that's what makes it fascinating. I even love the details about how there are different areas of Iran with different power centers.
right.
I watched Game of Thrones for the first time last year, and I'm the nerd who watched it and went, "Oh, he's riffing on the Wars of the Roses and
Right.
immediately all the historical elements." And
Hmm.
those kinds of political regime changes have always fascinated me because it is such a delicate play of power between different power brokers. And that's something you
Right.
play with in this book. Would you mind speaking just a little bit to that without spoiling anything?
Yeah. Well, for me, that portion of it was when I was outlining book three. I wanted to obviously, book three is about regime change. Okay, so
Hmm.
the title kind of gives that away a little bit.
Yeah.
So I wanted to take a look at you know the last war in Iraq and say, okay, this is what we did,
Hmm.
and let me analyze, what went wrong and how I can utilize that in the sense of a plot, and to ensure that my story, you know, the coup in my novel goes a hell of a lot better than it went in Iraq, because one of the things that you know you can definitely say about the second war in Iraq is that when the government, the U.S. government at the time, thought that once Saddam was gone, it was going to be ding dong, the witch is dead, and democracy will take over. They you didn't know, they didn't do their research. They didn't know the
Hmm.
Middle East as well as they should have, and it's quite a shame the way things turned out. So I wanted to try and prevent that. So the best way for me to prevent that was to take a look at the different areas of Iran and determine how each one functions, and if a coup was to take place and we had someone in place like General Lajani, who is the inside man in the Revolutionary Guard in my novel, how would he bring them together, and what would his plan be in order to do it? Because if you don't organize it in that type of a way, then you all the little sections of Iran are just, they're going to either do their own thing, or one of them is going to just try and take over and just start blowing up different pieces of the country. So you have to be able to, the character has to be able to maintain control, and the only way to maintain control is to understand how each part works. And so that was a fun part of the research, and I'm glad you feel that way, because that took me the longest on the research, because if I didn't get that part right, then it wasn't the coup, the plot of the coup was not going to work.
Well, and one of the elements of it that I really appreciate, and again, this doesn't spoil anything, is that part of how this hangs for the story is that the general is an expert in their constitutional law. And I'm
Right.
like, I love that because not only does it have really good action elements, you've got really good what I'll call like those drama elements where it's, oh, but this is what the law says, and figuring out how to use that to his advantage.
Yeah, it was that character, the Lajani character. I really had to develop a little bit more from book two. I gave people just enough of a taste of him in book two that I could pretty much do what I wanted with him in book three. And he had to be a very complete character because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the luxury. I didn't. When you're trying to put together a coup within the confines of one novel, it's pretty tough. I mean, in theory,
Mm-hmm.
book three, if I really wanted to draw it out, could have been its own series of three,
Yeah.
and I would have had, he would have had a staff of other people who knew constitutional law better than maybe he did. But in the end, if it's going to work, constitutional law is important. You can't just, go in there, kill the leader, and take over. There's a legal aspect to it, and there's not a lot written on the Iranian constitution. There's not a lot of stuff out there, so I did the best that I could based on the research that was available to me. But I knew that that was an essential element because legalities matter. Because otherwise, if we invaded Iran today, I'm not saying that's going to happen, and I do not want to see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be recognized internationally if regime change is going to change. But if it happens internally, then guess what? Iran, it's their party to try and run. So, and if that's the case, then law has to matter. It absolutely has to matter because otherwise, it's you're back to a dictatorship and it's chaos. So, in order to be able to maintain that, constitutional law was essential to the story.
How far did you plot this out? I'm curious, like so this is the third book in the series. When we
Mm-hmm.
started with the first one and you knew, okay, I've now can write two more books in this series.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Come up with ideas real quick. How far in the second book were you baking the third book?
Um, Not very far, because I don't want to give it away, but the second book ends with a cliffhanger,
Mm.
and I knew that I did want to um, explore regime change in book three, but that's really all that I knew because when I look at my novels, I look at how I want it to start, how I want it to end, and then
Mhm.
I work on the middle. But I wasn't thinking too far ahead on book three. But one of the things I did do differently between books two and three than I did between books one and two is after I submitted um, the first the first rough draft of book two to my editor, I started pretty much. I took maybe a 2 week break, and then I
Mm.
started working on book three immediately. So I didn't give myself a lot of time because I wanted to keep the
The
creative
momentum.
juices going. Yeah, I wanted to keep the momentum going because I knew if I waited a couple of months, I won't say that it wouldn't have happened, but there was a chance that maybe some of the things that made it into the book weren't going to make it
Hmm.
because I really look at books two and three as essentially one story because there's only a couple of months in between two and three, where I think there's like 6 to 9 months between books one and two. Um, so that was what I did differently, but I was not outlining book three as I was working on two because my process is essentially this. I'll come up. I'm one of the few people who still starts, outlining things, by hand on a legal pad.
Hmm.
And when I start having the ideas and I start developing the characters, I'll say, I think my chapters are, about 60 chapters long or something, 50, 60 chapters long, something like that. And I'll get maybe a third of the way through. And that's when pressure kind of comes in like, oh my God,
Uh-huh.
how am I gonna get the rest of this in?
Yeah.
But, chapter three may be as simple as, uh, you know, Terrence walks into the room to talk to the congressman, and that's all I give myself. And then, then at that point I'm a pantser. I just sit
Hmm.
down and say, this is what I have the idea of what I want to think happen, but then I let my fingers do the walking on the keyboard and I let the creative juices just flow. And I give myself permission to write a bad chapter or a
Hmm.
couple of bad chapters. And then, all of a sudden, the chapter where, Terrence goes to talk to the congressman, maybe there's more into it. Maybe that turns into two chapters, and then maybe from that one, there's a spinoff. I can create a subplot from that one. So it's one of those things where, for me, there was a quite a bit of liberation for me, because I just allowed myself. I didn't have anybody to report to but myself. There was no
Hmm.
bosses around here. There's just
Hmm.
me, and I am responsible for the story. And is that a little bit scary? Sure, but in the end, if I am responsible for the story, and that I wouldn't have it any other way, because I don't want anybody telling me that you can't do this. I did not tolerate that from my editor or my publisher. I was like, this is my story. You can take it or leave it.
Hmm.
And that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, is that I just decided, this is where I'm going. This is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it.
That's awesome. I recently read The Editor of Genius by Scott Berg. It's
Hmm.
the story of Max Perkins, who was the editor for Hemingway, Thomas Wolfe, and Fitzgerald.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's
Wow.
literally one guy changed literature forever.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is to see how he handled the different types of personalities in the authors. Hemingway was much the same as what you've described for yourself, in that he's like, he fought any little change the editorial staff wanted to make because he meticulously worked on it beforehand.
Sure. Yeah.
And whereas, say, Fitzgerald or Thomas Wolfe, he needed to give a little bit more TLC. Here, we need a massage there.
Sure.
I'm let me help you figure this out. And
Right.
I think that's one of the wonderful things about writing and authorship, is really having a good working relationship, good collaborators, good editors, good publishers. They know how to
Hmm.
work with every author's style. And
Yeah,
it's
I would
great that you
agree.
have that level of ownership over the material, because I think that that is more in the minority for most authors than in actuality.
I think it would depend on, how big the publisher is, and, what type of editor you have. I mean, my editor, we worked pretty well together, and he was a tough son of a gun. But I mean, one of the things that I never discount somebody's criticism when they say that maybe this doesn't make sense and you need to kind
Hmm.
of, tie this end up. That I
Hmm.
can accept.
Yeah.
But I am never going to accept somebody saying this character would not do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody knows the characters but me. And that was a lesson that I watched Quentin Tarantino. I think he was in the director's chair
Hmm.
on Robert Rodriguez's old network, El Rey. I don't know if it's still around, but anyway, he had him on, and he was concerned when he was doing Reservoir Dogs. He never directed. He was written. He'd just been a writer. But as he came in to be a director, he would all the technical stuff he could figure out. But the most important thing was he knew the story,
Hmm.
and he knew those characters. He knew this story, and nobody knows the story better than the author. So that's the one. That's my fine line. Is that, don't you tell me that this character wouldn't do that, because you may be editing 4 books, including mine, but this is mine, and I know what this guy would do. I'm the one that created it. I mean, I'll listen to it, and if it doesn't sound right, I'll consider it. But
Hmm.
I'm not going to say, I'm not going to let anybody tell me he or she wouldn't do that.
Yeah. I think it's Neil Gaiman to make the comment about, essentially, anytime someone tells you something doesn't work for them, they're right. It didn't work for them. When they give a option on how they think it should be changed, they're almost always wrong.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just, I think when an author is editing, he or she has to be open to changes, because if you're not open to changes, you're giving yourself permission to write a bad novel, or
Hmm.
write something that the readers will not understand, or something that doesn't connect. So criticism is fine, and you have to be able to accept criticism. But in the end, you know where the story is going, and you know what the character's feeling, what his thought process is. So that's why I'm pretty hard on stuff like that. But tying up loose ends, or what if the character did this instead of that, I'll consider that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
not changes in personality,
No.
because character development is way too important for me, and that's why Vince Flynn was such an influence. I mean, he would be the first to say that his all of his novels had a recipe to it. I heard him say in an
Hmm.
interview. You had the heroes, you had the terrorists, you had the plot, and then you had the politicians who were like the sub villains. And every book was essentially followed that formula, but every book had a different plot. It wasn't a crazy plot. It wasn't
Hmm.
Mission Impossible, but his characters always were strong, whether it be
Hmm.
Irene Kennedy or Mitch Rapp. And you fell in love with these characters so much because you just want he made the bad guy so bad that
Uh-huh.
you were just waiting, I mean drooling for Mitch Rapp to just stick it to him, whether it be the terrorist or the politician. And then when
Hmm.
he finally did it, it was kind of like, ah,
The release
now,
of dramatic tension, the catharsis
yeah,
has started.
exactly. Now, I'm not saying I did it that well, but that was the lesson that I took from his novels, and I tried to do
Hmm.
that as well as I could.
Well, and that's been the interesting thing for me is reading. I'm starting with your third book. I'm looking forward to going through and reading all of them. The
Oh, thank you.
These are characters that feel immediately real. They
Yeah.
have, and you have multiple characters that were moving from person to person. You mentioned Tarantino earlier. I think you do a great job of keeping the pace moving. Chapters are kind of like your scene edits where you
Yeah.
cut from bit to bit and you keep
Right.
it at a good rhythm where we linger where we have to linger and then we
Hmm.
do quick shots where we have to do quick shots. I,
Yeah.
as someone who gets, I'm the reader that eventually, if it becomes boring, I just start skimming the page and moving on.
Right. Yeah.
That's not what I'm doing with your book because you're keeping the rhythm regular enough that I'm not losing attention.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's I'm kind of like you. I've always been a really big movie buff, and I've always
Mm-hmm.
been a very visual person. So, I yeah, I tell you, it drives my wife crazy because I will take a movie that I love, and I
Mm-hmm.
will just rewatch it and rewatch it and rewatch it, and I will dissect
Yes.
every single thing that happened, and think about, well, why did the writer do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why does this make sense? Because for me, that's how I learned. I
Yeah.
mean, that is all part of plot development. And a quick example is that in the movie Speed from 93, 94 with
Mm-hmm.
Keanu Reeves and the bus. There was this, remember the scene after the party and he goes into the diner and he's talking to the bus driver, and the bus driver leaves, and Keanu Reeves is walking out with him, and the guy that's running the counter says, "Hey, you forgot your muffin." So he walks back, gets his muffin, and then he walks back out. And I was like, that was stupid. I always thought that was so stupid. I never understood. But then as I got older, I understood that if Keanu Reeves had walked out with the bus driver at the same time, he wouldn't have seen the bus explode.
Mm-hmm.
The time it took for him to walk back, get it, go back out, and then go to his car, it gave him enough time for the bus driver to get to the bus, sit down, start it, and then see it explode. So it's the tiny little details like that that can make a good plot go to great.
Mm-hmm. I recently read, so Matt Bird wrote The Secrets of Story and then The Secrets of Character. And in The Secrets of Character, he makes a comment, you have the first 10 pages to grip people. And
Oh
you
yeah,
do that by having characters you believe, care, and invest in. And I thought that was such
right,
a great way of picturing it because essentially we don't care about, like, readers think they care about plot. Plot, like you mentioned with Vince Flynn's books, plot is actually kind of low on the rung. What we want
right,
is people we want to be on an adventure with.
exactly.
And having strong characters makes it a great adventure. Like detective stories. I love those old pulpy detective dime store
Oh yeah,
novels. But the
oh
thing
yeah,
is, they're the same thing over and over again. But what makes you want to go on the adventure is not the problem they're solving, it's the character you're going on the adventure with.
yeah, and how that character deals with that problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. And I mean, when I took one of the master classes I took before I started Lions Den was James Patterson's. Now, I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
huge James Patterson fan just because he's started to farm out a lot of his novels to other writers, but his early stuff is still great. And one of the first things he ever said is like your first chapter has got to be like you're grabbing the reader by the collar and you're bringing them in like this, and that kind of stuck with me. And I personally, I am a very firm believer. I am totally impatient. I am so impatient, especially with a
Uh-huh.
streaming server or a streaming show. If
Oh,
there's so much
yes.
out there, if it doesn't capture me by the first episode, I'm done. I'm not.
Hmm.
I'm not going to deal with it.
So you did
And with
make
a
it through
book,
Mandalorian season 3.
oh no, 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 no. I liked season one, but it was still a little slow for me. But if it doesn't capture me right away, it's there's too many other shows and movies that are out there
Hmm.
that I can't afford to waste my time.
Yeah.
But with books, I used to I'd give them 100 pages. Now it's 50, and I adhere to that same rule as I'm writing my novel. So one of the I think for all three novels, I have to start it out. You really
Hmm.
have to grab the reader and say,
Yep.
"Ooh, this is happening quick. I better keep paying attention." And you got to keep them turning the pages. So 50 pages is if I spend more time editing the first 50 pages and reading and rereading it than I do anything else in my novel, just to make sure that the pace is good, the characters are strong, their instincts are there, and it'll keep the readers interested. Because the worst thing that can happen is either they start skimming or they decide they're just going to put it down, and that's unacceptable to me.
Yeah. And I think that you make a strong choice in Ayatollah Takedown, to which, by the way, has a great rhythm for like the syllables.
Okay, you want a quick story on that? Okay,
Yes.
so okay, so I told you earlier I was on the phone with my agent trying to come up with the titles and the storylines for books two and three, and she's like, I already had the Iranian Deception. That one was already there. And book three, I was like, you need to give me a minute, and she's like, go ahead, just take your time. She's an impatient person, but she was very patient with me that day. So I came in here, I'm looking at the books on my shelf. I'm like, got to figure something out real quick. And I have Brad Thor's Takedown up
Uh-huh.
there. So I
Yes.
knew I knew I had Iran. I didn't want the Iranian takedown. I knew, or something like that. The T's and Ayatollah and takedown just kind of came to me,
Hmm.
and it ended up working.
Hmm. I mean, really, titles are such a craft. Like
Oh yeah,
it's like
essential.
that, those guys that do really I hate clickbait titles on articles and YouTube videos, but I get that that's like how it works. But
Right.
crafting the right title, especially in a book, it's fascinating. And I think you really have done a great job with making them tell you what you're in for,
Hmm.
but not spoiling it. Like it
Right.
gives me an idea, this is what the story is going to be about, but not going farther than that, which again, I think there is an art in that itself. Sell me the premise without telling me the twists.
Yeah, and again, because the cover is your number one marketing tool, I try and use the title and the artwork on the cover to kind of tell just enough of a story to make somebody pick it up. I honestly don't know how, like Brad Thor, I mean, he'll say, he'll be working on, he'll just, when he hands it in, he'll just say Harvest Story number 22 or whatever, and then he works on the title with, the publisher or whatever, and it obviously that works for him. I couldn't do that. It just,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I will submit a title, and if somebody says, well, we need to work on a little bit, that's fine. But title to me is too important, because it lays the foundation of where I want to go, and I have to do it like that.
So two things about Brad Thorpe. One, honestly, his titles usually just feel interchangeable in my opinion. Great, he's a great writer. Obviously, he's been very successful, but that's always my feeling. With the exception of the
Mm,
Athena project, I think is my favorite title of all of them,
mm,
and it's the
that's
one that
true.
like went nowhere. The
Yeah, arguably his best one, and it should have been made into a movie. But he kissed every frog in Hollywood, and they just wouldn't take it. But yeah, I agree with you.
The other thing is, ironically enough, so I'm originally from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which
Okay.
is featured in like two or three of Brad Thor's books because his
Yeah.
family is from Chicago and they used to
Right.
vacation in Lake Geneva. I met like a
Yeah.
family friend of his at the library when I was working there as a kid, and I told the dude, I'm pretty certain Brad Thor must be a pseudonym because no man actually has the name Brad Thor. And then I found out that was his
And
actual name.
yeah, 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 he does. Yeah, it was. You think it would be what was it called, like a pseudonym or something like that, but the guy lucked out. And if you want me to be honest, I played with a couple of names like that, and my wife was just like, "No, you just stick with what you got.
I
Your name is short, and it works."
It really does work because again, you have that symmetry of the two T's.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
this is that weird thing where you start parsing, like we were talking about with movies, you start parsing things out and you realize really like it's pretty great when you have a name that actually like works symmetrically, like Mickey
right.
Spillane. Uh,
Yeah,
Sometimes it works.
it
Um,
just rolls off your tongue. Yeah.
yeah, and with movies, comment I was going to make, my siblings no longer go to the movies with me because they said every time we walk out of the theater, it doesn't matter if you like the movie or not, you're just instantly tearing it apart. I'm like, yes, that's because I liked it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love doing that. I absolutely love, you know, talking with somebody about what worked, what didn't. And I mean, that's what one of the reasons my wife and I still go to the movies together,
Mhm.
because we love discussing it. I mean, that's the fun part. If you're not
Hashtag
talking about
couple
it, then why did you
goals.
enjoy it? What's that?
Hashtag relationship goals. Still going to the movies
Yeah,
together.
absolutely, absolutely. Although I won't see Barbie. Barbie, I won't go see Barbie, but but when we go, we find one we like together. Yeah, we'll definitely go. She won't do the horror movies with me. She's not
Mm.
a horror movie person like I am. I love a good horror movie, but Mission Impossibles and all the political and historical stuff, yeah,
Mhm.
it's down. I love talking about it.
Which I want to ask actually about your background in political science
Yeah.
affecting your writing. But first, I just saw the trailer for the new Hercule Poirot film, Haunting in Venice. I'm curious, is that a film you're
Oh,
going to see? Because the trailer is cut
absolutely.
so much like a horror movie. At first, I was like, is this because like I knew that the next one was going to be kind of horror-ish, but I was like,
Yeah,
I'm not, is this like just a straight up horror movie? I'm going to be so curious to see it.
absolutely. You count me in. I will absolutely see that one. Yeah, I think I saw one of the teaser trailer that was like maybe
Hmm.
30 seconds long a couple of months ago, and even then I knew. I was like, yeah, I gotta go see this one. I absolutely have to.
So, your background is in history and political science is your
Mhm.
major. How much have you seen that come into play in the development of your novels?
It was essential for me because I started out when I was a political science major in college. I hadn't planned on doing a double major in history, but I've always been interested in it. I think kind of thank my mom for that one,
Hmm.
because we always kind of talk about history and how things have shaped how the past has kind of shaped the future. And I had two or three really good history teachers at Hamden Sydney College, and one of them did the American side, one did the Europe side, and one did I think it was all the monarchies.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, and I just learned so much when they were so good that I don't think what I learned is that I don't think you can talk politics without also talking history. So
Hmm.
you have to be able to combine the two of them. And obviously there are political aspects to my novel, and uh, I don't think one of the main themes in the Ayatollah Takedown was the key to Iran's future is its past. So if you don't
Hmm.
understand the past, you're not going to be able to shape the future. And I always kind of took that to heart. But
Hmm.
I've always liked novels that when they're talking about a certain chapter or where the character is, they always give a historical background to it, because otherwise they're just going to this location and it seems kind of cool. You may want to go there, you may not, but to give some history on it, it always puts a little sprinkles on top a little bit. So for me, it's always important when I'm describing a location or a country to give background on it. Obviously, you can't do that without talking about the history portion of it.
Hmm. What's next? So we've got the third book here in the series,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to do a
Yeah.
double take because at first I was like, "Oh, it's a trilogy," and then I'm like, "Oh wait,
Mm-hmm.
it says book three." which leaves
Yeah.
the opening for a book four.
So book four is possible. The contract that I signed with my publisher is now up. My contract was for three. I don't know whether or not there's going to be a fourth one or not. I have a couple of ideas for it, but we're trying to, as an author, you always have to look at it from a business side as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to see, how well the books continue to sell. I am going to BoucherCon in San Diego, which is,
Mm-hmm.
an authors and readers conference. So I'm going to see how well things books are received there. But once you're an author, you just can't turn off the creative juices. So I have
Mm-hmm.
an idea for what I want to do for book four, if there is one, if my publisher wants to have one. But if I end up going a different route, I've started outlining a couple of different. I've actually have three ideas that I've started outlining, and they're all within the thriller genre, but they're all very different.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I'm not at the stage yet where I want to talk about them, but because Tom Clancy always had a superstition of talking about his novels too early, so I'm going to kind of adhere to that. But I will say this, that I think, yeah, two of them are still involved. The CIA is still involved in some way, and on the other one, I'm kind of uh, going out on a limb and kind of testing my own limits, so to speak.
Okay. Well, I'm excited for whatever you come out with next. I really enjoyed your book so far. I've heard you make the comment that chapter 33 is the one where people are
Yeah.
either going to be on board or not. Can I just tell you, I am very on board. Uh, I
Thank
was
you.
I heard that and I was like, I think I know what chapter that is. And then I searched back. I'm like, yes. I think that for those that are listening, get to chapter 33. Let us know if that worked for you. It's very clever, I think.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
it's a smart use of multiple different things coming together in the most unexpected way possible. And that I think is part of what I love about good writing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I book three for me, because it was my last one in the series in terms of this contract. Again, there could be a book four, but I had to write book three as if it was going to be the end. I don't know if that's the
Mm-hmm.
case, but I had to write it that way. Um, but I've seen enough movies that so many of them rely on this one scene, and whether or not you
Mm-hmm.
believe this scene will depend on whether or not you believe the rest of the movie. One of the best ones I can think of was I think it was in '99 with Clooney and Jennifer Lopez, the Out of Sight movie,
Okay,
where
so
they're
this is
stuck
the
in the trunk.
second time this has come up on the podcast in
Oh,
like the
really?
last month.
Really?
I
Really?
I am currently reading the book because I started watching the movie and went, wait a minute, I got this in a pile of Elmore Leonard books. I need to finish it.
Yeah. So I mean, the scene in the trunk. I mean, they're kind of flirting with each other and falling in love in the trunk. So if you believe that scene, you're gonna want to watch the rest of the movie or the rest of the book, whatever the case may be. If you don't, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, I'll finish it. So it was a big risk to me on my part. But one of the things that I've heard Brad Thor talk about is that if you're not pushing yourself as an author,
Mm-hmm.
then you're not making a lot of progress, and it's going to make it harder for you to write future novels, because otherwise you're just kind of recycling the same thing. And I'm not talking about a formulaic type plot. I'm talking about being able to ensure that the reader turns a page from chapter to chapter. And I decided I there was no reason for me not to try it. And I'm glad you feel that way, because I spent a lot of time on chapter 33. Usually I kind of write them, I put them down, I go back the next day, I'll reread them, I'll edit it, and then I go on to the next one. 33, it took me a couple of days to really perfect that one, just simply because I was so nervous about it. I'm like, man, I'm either going to get a lot of praise, or I'm going to get a lot of emails from people saying this is just out of line. You cannot, there's no way anybody is going to believe this. But in the end, I ended up being pretty proud of it, because I think I took a lot of different character elements
Mm-hmm.
and came up with a big enough of a surprise, especially the way the Iranian culture is, and
Mm-hmm.
the way they view religion and how God has preordained certain things to happen. I can't give away too much more than that, but I ended up being very proud of it. I'm glad you feel that way because I was really nervous about it.
Well, and what I've read is the best action scenes, the best moments in books are the ones that show character choices. And like
Hmm.
we'll use the out of sight example at the moment. Like
Yeah,
that scene between them is a character scene because you are getting very much this is the kind of person she is that in this situation she reacts this way. This is the type of
right.
guy he is because in this situation he's reacting this way. I
Yeah,
think that what you've done in that particular section is you force the characters into we are in an impossible situation and this is how we improvise and it shows the range of their cleverness and the range of their connections and an understanding of this is why I really like is how the general uses the situation to his advantage because it shows who
yeah.
he is that he knows how to use this. So again, high praise, definitely enjoyed it. One last question I'll
Thank you.
ask you here. What is
Absolutely.
your writing routine? Do you have a writing routine?
Yeah, I do. So like I said, I do the outline and then, I kind of go along and write it chapter by chapter. I do one chapter a day.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the chapter is really short, then I'll do two. But I don't have a number of words per day that I write. Some people say, I want to write exactly 376 words a day. I can't do that. That's my one hard rule is that once I start a chapter, I have to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe it's my ADD or whatever, but that just bugs me. I can't leave anything unfinished. Um, so I will write one chapter a day. It usually ends up being just call it roughly 1,500 words. It may be
Mm-hmm.
shorter, it may be less. So 1,500 words, and then once I'm done with it, I stop. That's it. I don't want to do anymore. I feel like that's the way to maximize my creative juices for the day. And it's also if I'm writing 60 chapters, technically, if you, by that timeline, I can do it in 2 months. It never works
Mm-hmm.
out like that, but it's a good timeline. It makes it easier to write the book in a more concise amount of time. So I'll leave it alone, and then I'll come back the next day. And before I start writing the next chapter, I'll reread the chapter I wrote
Mm.
yesterday, and I'll make sure it makes sense. I'll do some editing on it, which saves me time down the line. But it also gets the creative juices going, so I'm not, starting cold. You don't want to. To me, you never want to go to a golf course and just, start off on the first tee. You got to warm up a little bit. So that's my way to kind of warm up. And as far as what time of day was I doing it? I work my 8 to 5 job. I'll come downstairs. My wife and I watch TV. We'll have dinner. We'll play with the dogs. Whatever. She has a tendency to fall asleep on the couch around 8:30, 9 o'clock. So I got tired of just finding something else to stream. So I'll go upstairs and I'll write. Do have my routine and I'll do it till maybe 11 o'clock or midnight, and then I start over the next day. And I think routine is I think routine is important. But if routine is not important to you, to the writers out there, what is important is that you make an effort to write every day. And if you're not
Mm-hmm.
writing every day, you have to be able to think about what you want to do with your plot. Make some notes or find a way to work on it in some way every day if you're not writing. But obviously, if you know where you're going, write. Find a way to write every day.
That's awesome. I love that you've got the warm up because that's something that I've used, and I think it makes it so much easier because then you're not just trying to start cold. It's like those engines you just hear going.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, warm up is too important to me because it's if you start cold, it opens you up to make too many mistakes. And when you're an author, um, you're the one that's in control. So mistakes can happen,
Mhm.
but you have to be able to look at your chapter or your plot or your character very objectively and say, this isn't working. I mean, when I did my first draft of Lion's Den was 130,000 words. And the person I sent it to, she's like, okay, you've got a lot of work to do. You got to cut some stuff down. And I spent I spent a couple of months researching the old U.S. embassy, and
Hmm.
it was about 30,000 words just associated with these characters. Because in the first one, it was in the original draft, it was about three friends that go to Iran, and I had to cut it. You
Hmm.
have to cut it, and you have to be able to look at it like that, because my take on it is if I don't cut this, it's not going to be a good book.
Yep.
So it's got to go. So
Hmm.
it was me or the words, and
Yeah.
I take it like that, and I never view the delete key as my opponent. I
Hmm.
view the delete key as my friend, because you always want to try and be very concise with your writing, make your point, be descriptive, make your point as short as you can, and if something's not working, be honest with yourself and get rid of it, because you can always go back and either save it and find a way to put it in later, or um, maybe it just didn't work. But
Hmm.
the flow is just too important. It is too important in novels. So um, you have to be willing to get rid of what's not working.
That is a wonderful point because I recently read someone's novel. They self-published it. They did their own editing, and you can tell because
Mm,
it's a good book with way too much extra. And I'm just like, if he had trimmed the fat on this, it would be a
yeah,
fantastic book. Instead, it's just an okay book.
yeah, and that's where greatness is in the details. And that's why to me editing is so important, because I do tend to be a little bit of an overwriter, and
Hmm.
I think that's a good thing, because I'd
It
rather
is.
take stuff out than feel like it's too short and have to come back, go back into the plot and
Fluff it up.
recreate, or yeah, fluff it up and create something totally new. But that's why having an outside editor is essential. And the one that I had when I my draft from book one, my draft from the first draft to largely what is now the final product. I had an editor in New York that I hired by the name of Caroline Tolley, and she was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, she was so good, and I learned so much from her. But editing is important. It is not only important; it is essential.
Hmm. Matt Scott, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. Where can people go to learn more about you, your work, and your fantastic books?
You can always go to my website, mattscottbooks.com, and you can email me there. But I'm always active on social media. I do limit myself to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, just because I am not a TikTok fan. I don't trust the Chinese government. I don't care how popular it is. And I've heard about some of these other platforms that are out there. Three is my limit.
You haven't joined
Um,
Threads yet?
no, I'm not. No, three is my limit. My wife tells me I'm on my phone too much as it is. So, on Facebook, I have both a personal and a business account. And it doesn't matter if you message me on either one, I will absolutely answer you. I love hearing feedback from fans. And then my handle on both Instagram and Twitter is at Matt Scott Books. And stay tuned, because right now I'm on a roll, because the Redskins finally got rid of Dan Snyder. Ding dong, the witch is dead.
Oh, sports references. Matt, thanks
Yeah,
again for
sorry.
joining. No, that's okay. Thanks again for joining us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Terrence. It's been a pleasure. Can't wait to come back.
Absolutely.